death and the afterlife is actually something that's very personal to me as well. My spiritual journey began decades ago, and prior to that time, I was brought up in a religious environment, and I had a great love for God. There's no question about that. And I wasn't dogmatic in my beliefs. But there was a very strong foundation of perceiving God to be that which is outside of us, the judge, the ruler, the creator, the manifester, the one who creates the laws by which we're meant to abide. And I wasn't overly strict in my beliefs, but I was brought up in an environment that was devoted. And so through all of that, I formed a set of beliefs, which I think parallels what a lot of humanity believes, at least those who do believe in a God. But it wasn't central in my life. It was by no means central in my life. Perhaps when I was younger, it was just because of the environment of my family. But at this point, as a young adult, it wasn't. And then suddenly, as these things do happen, a dear friend of mine died in an automobile accident. And I had been around death before on more than one occasion, family members, friends in school when I was younger. But this struck me in a way that I couldn't explain. I couldn't logically make sense of it. I remember I was in California at the time, not living in California, but I was visiting California when I heard the news, and I immediately flew up to Vancouver and went to be with the family. And the grief in the room, like this was a young woman, 19 years old. It happened just before or after, I think just a couple of days after the Christmas holidays, after Christmas, so during the holidays. And I can even remember in this moment walking into the home, and there were friends and family gathered, and the air was thick with sadness and confusion and such deep, overwhelming grief. And this set off something very powerful within me that, in hindsight, I can only reflect as being my destiny. That was the perfectly set up trigger in my life to seek to understand more. And so whatever beliefs I had had up until that point just didn't satisfy me. And anyway, I won't go into the whole story of it, of what happened to me, other than to say this. It was almost a feeling of being haunted by this death that stayed with me for a period of a couple of years. And during this time, my life completely changed. I went on a spiritual journey, a quest. It started with reading books, and then taking myself away to a modern day ashram in Washington State, in the US. And it led to a further and further adventure that happened over the course of the next months and years. And all of a sudden, 2 years later, I was living on the opposite end of the country, and I was in the company of a very, very sweet family. The mother and the daughter both were extraordinarily intuitive. The mother used to practice reflexology. And yet when she would place her hands upon your feet, she would go into an almost trance-like state, and she would start channeling wisdom, information, whatever was needed to be conveyed for the purpose of your physical well-being, your emotional well-being, or whatever else. Now, I had, at this point, after Yasmin's death and up until this 2-year mark, I had encountered a couple of channels already. But this family in particular was very close to me. I spent a lot of time with them. And one evening we were having dinner together. We were all seated on the living room floor. We might have been playing cards or something, or just talking. Maybe, I don't even remember what happened. And all of a sudden, Denise, the daughter, and she would have been in her early mid-20s, she started swaying. And she was feeling, you could see that she was feeling more and more uncomfortable, but it was something, she wasn't even completely in her right mind in that moment, wasn't completely present. And right away, her mother reached out to Jim. So her mom was Kay, reached out to Jim and said, Jim, go and hold Denise. Someone is trying to enter her. I didn't even fully comprehend what was happening in that moment. And so Jim just went down onto wherever he was, he went and held Denise, and then Kay went into a trance immediately. She started swaying, and then after a few moments, a voice came through her. And her voice sounded very different. It was higher pitched. It was very meek. Frightened would be the way that I would describe it, and very faltering, very hesitating. And I think Kay did say to me before that happened, she said, this is for you. She pointed to me and said, this is for you. And then this happened. And what transpired next, I didn't even know myself to be intuitive. So, wind forward 30 years, and yes, I recognize that I'm very highly intuitive. That said, at that point in time, that wasn't even, I was experiencing this in others, but I was still very much in the intellect and operating from this space and not recognizing that I had any gifts whatsoever. And all of a sudden, there were things that were being spoken by me, and it was me who was doing the talking, but I had no understanding of even the thought process that was behind what I was saying. And so this voice, the voice that came through initially wasn't even saying anything. It was more, it seemed to be whimpering. And right away, I said, Yasmin, is that you? Something to that effect. Is this Yasmin, or Yasmin, is that you? I think I was speaking to her directly, so it probably would have been Yasmin, is that you? And suddenly the whimpering stopped. And there was a very brief communication that took place there, where we discovered, and much of this full realization happened afterwards when we were talking about it, but came the realization that in the moment of her death was such a sudden death, an automobile accident, which she didn't know what had happened. She had been thrust out of her body that could no longer hold her, no longer sustain her. And she hadn't experienced her own death. She hadn't realized in that moment that she was not among the living anymore. And so in my communication with her, I was saying things to her that she was interpreting differently. And it came out that, but I'm trying to talk to my family, I'm trying to reach, but everyone is ignoring me. Everyone is just ignoring me. So again, now she had this perception that there's all of this sadness and grief around her in her life and in her family. And from my perspective, for the last probably 2.5 years, she was in complete isolation, completely alone. I later realized that for her, time hadn't passed. It was all just very much in the now. It wasn't a feeling of 2 years of being completely snubbed and ignored and rejected by your family and friends. And then again, it came to me she knew my grandfather, who had passed away many years before. And maybe she only would have known him when she was very young. But I said, I asked her to picture my grandfather and to call him And in that moment, her words were, "Oh my God, he looks so young." And the next words were, "Go with him, he's here to take you home." Prior to that, I did explain to her what had happened. I said, "You were in an accident. Your body was no longer able to sustain you anymore." I asked her to look at her body in that moment, and she shuddered. Like there was, again, more of that whimpering, more of that fear, but perhaps even a moment of realization. I've written this down, so my memory of it today is looser than what I've written in times past. But and then she went. She went, and Kay gradually returned to her body. It was during this time that I was visiting El Marilla, who was the woman who taught me how to channel, quite regularly. And I remember on my next visit to see El Marilla, I asked about this experience. And Ursha, who El Marilla used to channel, basically just told me exactly what I've explained to you, which is that she had no concept of what death was. She had no understanding of it. And that at the moment of the accident, of her physical death, she actually did see her body, because that's the first thing that happens when your spirit leaves, is that you are brought to examine your body as a recognition that you are no longer in the body. But she completely dismissed it. It was almost as if it wasn't real. It was a moment of disbelief, perhaps. And from that point forward, her reality was that she existed in the human realm. And so she continued to be with those that she wanted to be with, her family, her friends. But she felt complete isolation, because as if she's here in the room with us even now, and we're not acknowledging her because we can't, because we don't recognize the spirit form. So I share that with you because it was that event that led me on a journey. I needed to understand. It wasn't that event of what happened 2 years later, but it was her death that led me off on the journey. And then 2 years later, when I had this experience, it impacted me again on such another deep and profound level. The realization that just how real life is, and that life does not end with the physical death. And from that point, I came to learn of how many different experiences can occur upon death, based on the belief systems that we have, based on the woundings that we carry within, based on our beliefs in judgment and condemnation. And one of the wishes that I have is to be able to share with the world that these old ideas that exist in many traditions of different forms of judgment, that if you do bad, then bad will be done to you, or that you will earn a station in life the next time wherein all of these things, we can begin to examine life differently. Everyone who crosses over is received in light. Everyone, to the degree that they are prepared to enter the light. Some people hold on to resistance. Some people are attracted to darkness. And when they make their transition, then it can be very difficult for them to make that full transition into the light. But those in the light are always looking for ways to bring them home. So I wanted to share this just as my own personal message at the beginning. Death is a beautiful thing. I lost my parents, it'll be 9 years this year, 9 years ago. They both passed away within a very, very short time, just a few months apart. And it's one of the most painful experiences that a person can go through, to lose their parents. And I'm sure to lose children would be a million times worse than even that. Um, but with the knowing that I have, and what I know, I truly know. I've had numerous experiences since that first one with Yasmin, where even as a channel, I've assisted people in connecting to the other side, not for the purpose of being a medium, but at times for the purpose of bringing comfort and understanding. And there's an undeniable reality that those who have existed in this realm continue to exist beyond. And it would be my desire for everyone to come to a place where there is no fear of death. There is no fear of, because with the loss of fear in death comes a more of a relaxation in life as well. So anyway, I won't talk too much more about this. I think we should just dive into the channeling again.
You mentioned that some people have resistance and they're holding on to the darkness. It's not that easy for them to transition to the light. So what happens to them then?
Some of them find their fulfillment playing around in the ethers or even in the earth realm and influencing others. So some people who have had particularly painful pasts, say painful childhoods, or they carry just a very low vibration within them, often it happens with people who have been tormented in some form or another, deeply wounded through abuse. And then they grow up in life to become abusers. And they find a sense of empowerment in that, which is in contrast to the utter defeat that they experienced in childhood at the hands of their oppressors. And so some people then grow into the kind of people that today we bang a gavel and put them in prison. And then when they cross over, there is no part of them that even wants to believe or can believe in redemption. And they are still unfulfilled in their anger. And they have a need to continue to express that anger or to cause harm or to influence. And so they stay close to the earth realm. And they often have a very powerful negative impact upon those who are not grounded in their strength. And so there are people in this world. There are people in the spiritual communities of this world as well who learn to open themselves up, but haven't learned to discern what they are opening themselves up to. And the result can be that what can appear to be magical and spiritual and beautiful is actually dark and destructive and controlling. And so for some, in the non-spiritual communities, it can impact people psychically, it can impact people emotionally, it can lead to what are often diagnosed as mental disorders. In certain spiritual circles around the world, I've encountered channels or psychics who are connecting to darkness. And people who don't know how to discern, how to feel, who haven't learned how to feel, but are simply listening to the messages, get wowed because they're hearing something that, well, nobody can know that about me, and this is information, and this is something, and it feels powerful, and yet it carries with it a very destructive intention. And so this is another reason why one of the most important teachings that we bring forward is one of discernment. We have to learn how to feel so that we can learn to discern what we are experiencing. It's not only a tool that assists us in our own journey of healing and evolution, but it's also a tool that can enable us to be more clear as to what's happening in the world around us and in the spirit realm around us. And so I don't say this to create fear. This is nothing to be fearful of, because they only have as much power as we give them. But I would say, well, because we're speaking to a spiritual community, I would say don't be naive. I have a circle in which I teach people to channel, but it is a slow, patient process. And people are only welcomed into that circle after they have spent a significant period of time on their own journey of healing and integration and expansion. And then the journey is very much one of mastering your own state of well-being so that you choose to channel only when you're in that uplifted state. See? But yeah, I remember one of the things that was told to me 30 years ago by Ursha and Elmarilla. It probably happened in that reading where I was questioning about Yasmin, is that I had the gift to be able to connect to, and remember, this was a time where I didn't realize I had gifts, right? But I was told that I had a gift to be able to connect to the spirits of those who had crossed over, but hadn't gone home for whatever reason, either because they didn't realize that they were dead, or they were too frightened to go home, or that they carried density within them that they couldn't release, that would then free them to go home. And they suggested to me, because at this point I was living in the mountains of North Carolina and North Georgia. And so they told me, they said, go out into the forest, walk the hills, and summon the soldiers. They said there are many soldiers who continue to roam the land from the American Civil War, which took place, in the mid-1800s. Walk the land, call them. They will feel your light, they will see your light, they will be drawn to you, and then direct them home to the light. And so I used to just go and do that. And back then I was not sensitive, so I had no idea whether I was having an impact at all. But I would go out there and I would say it out loud, just, I am here in the name of love. Those of you who are lost and alone, go home. There's a light here ready to receive you. Go home. So again, nothing to fear other than when we are not strong in our container, then we become vulnerable. Most important spiritual lesson of all is to know that we are to be strong. We are to be powerful containers of light. We're not meant to be so open that we are not discerning what we are open to. Yeah? Thanks for that question.